Victoria Steele wasn't used to waiting. She was the kind of woman whose time was measured in millions, Fortune 500 CEO, custom-tailored power suits, a phone that never stopped buzzing. Her world moved fast and she liked it that way. So when her private jet was grounded due to sudden storms and she was forced to board a commercial flight, coach class, she felt displaced, surrounded by crying babies, business casual, and worn backpacks. She slid into her cramped window seat with a sigh of controlled annoyance, barely glancing at the man beside her. Mid-40s, quiet, clocked in anonymity. No tailored suit, no tech, just presence. She turned away, eager to plug back into her world, emails, numbers, power. But something about that stranger made her pause, just for a second. But little did Victoria know, the stranger beside her was about to change everything. The plane lifted off with a slow rumble, and Victoria buried herself in spreadsheets and investor updates, the glow of her laptop painting her face in cold blue light. Time was money, and turbulence had followed her from the tarmac into the sky. Beside her, Elijah sat silently. He didn't scroll, didn't type, didn't even wear earbuds, just looked out the window with the kind of ease Victoria couldn't understand. About 20 minutes into the flight, he turned and offered a small smile. "First time flying commercial?" he asked, not mockingly, just curious. She blinked. "Excuse me. You've checked your watch 12 times. Nerves usually mean either first-timers or people really uncomfortable being still." There was no arrogance in his tone, just observation, and that irritated her even more. "I'm fine," she replied curtly, eyes back on her glowing screen. "Just a lot on my plate." He nodded, then returned to the window, unoffended, unbothered. Victoria stole a sideways glance at him. He wore a second-hand jacket, faded at the shoulders. His hands rested calmly on his lap, no watch, no gadgets, no rings. Just calloused fingers and the quiet kind of stillness that speaks louder than any noise. "Where are you headed?" he asked gently sometime later. "New York," she said without looking up. "Business, always." She regretted the ice in her tone as soon as the words left her mouth. But he didn't seem fazed. He just smiled again, a soft, patient kind of smile that seemed strangely out of place on a crowded plane. "You?" she asked, surprising even herself. "To a funeral," he said, voice low. The air between them shifted. She looked up, then down, uncertain. "I'm sorry to hear that," she muttered. "Thank you," he said simply. "It's for someone I treated a long time ago. We lost touch. She always said I was the only doctor who ever really listened." "Doctor?" Now that caught her attention. She looked at him again, more carefully this time. But before she could ask more, the plane jolted slightly. The fastened seatbelt sign flashed. Silence settled once again, but something had shifted. Victoria still didn't know this man. But for reasons she couldn't explain, she suddenly wanted to. And in just a few more minutes, she would witness exactly why he never needed first class to hold first importance. 35,000 feet above the ground, the cabin lights dimmed into a gentle twilight glow. Flight attendants pushed carts down the aisles. Laughter drifted from a few rows back. Everything seemed routine. Until it was. Suddenly, a panicked cry pierced the cabin. "Help, please, I think he's not breathing." From several rows ahead, a woman stood in the aisle, frantically shouting. An older man slumped against her, head tilted back, lips beginning to turn pale. The flight attendant nearby froze, wide-eyed, papers dropped, coffee cups tilted. The hum of engines was suddenly deafened by rising fear. Passengers craned their necks, unsure what to do. Some stood up, others held their breath. Victoria looked up, startled, laptop forgotten mid-keystroke. "Is there a doctor on board?" One of the attendants finally called out, voice tight, almost breaking. The seconds passed. Then a movement beside her. Elijah rose from his seat without a word, face calm but focused. The kind of stillness that comes before the storm, not after. She watched, stunned, as he moved through the crowded aisle with surprising speed and purpose, issuing instructions with quiet clarity once he reached the elderly man. "Sir, can you hear me?" No response. "Flight attendant, I need your emergency kit now. AED if you have it." He checked the man's pulse. Nothing. "I need someone to hold his head flat. Now, please." Someone obeyed. Elijah started chest compressions without hesitation, counting out loud as passengers looked on, eyes wide. Victoria stood now too, unable to stay still. Her throat tightened. This was no ordinary doctor. There was no panic in his eyes. No delay. Only resolve. He barked quick, coded instructions. "Oxygen tank here. Help me tilt. Good. Keep the airway open. Okay. Another 2 minutes of compressions before we try the defib." Moments blurred, crying, gasps, the chirp of the AED unit. Then the jolt, the body arching once, falling back. Silence. Then a cough. Then gasping breath. The elderly man sucked in precious air, chest rising, color slowly returning. Around the cabin, a hush fell, the kind of quiet when everyone silently agrees. They just witnessed a miracle. The flight attendants began to cry softly. A nearby woman whispered, "Oh my God," through trembling fingers. A man captured the last seconds on his phone. Victoria was frozen. Her hands trembled. It felt like the ground had shifted beneath her, even though they were still in the air. Elijah leaned back slightly, breathing through his nose, chest heaving, but never losing focus. "You're going to be okay, sir. Stay with me, just stay with me." Finally, he looked up, spotting Victoria's eyes on him. In that moment, the balance between them flipped entirely. Not long ago, she had dismissed him as an ordinary man in economy. But here he was holding a life in his arms, heart still pounding, hands that saved instead of signed. Power didn't look like a boardroom anymore. It looked like this. In a plane full of people with titles and wealth, Victoria would later reflect. The only true authority was the man beside me. The worst was over. Medics would be ready upon landing, the elderly man now breathing on oxygen, stable under Elijah's watchful eye. But in the moments that followed, something hung heavier in the cabin than before. Reverence. No applause. Just awe. The kind only silence could express. Victoria sat motionless, her mind racing, not with numbers or mergers this time, but with one lingering realization. She had misjudged him completely. Elijah slid back into his seat beside her, chest still rising and falling slowly. She turned to him, hesitant, vulnerable. "That was incredible," she said, her voice quieter than she'd heard it in years. He smiled softly, the same smile that earlier struck her as humble and strange. Now it looked like peace earned the hard way. "Are you a doctor?" she asked. A beat passed, then another. "Retired," he said, almost reluctantly. "You knew exactly what to do." I've done it too many times, in much worse places." Victoria studied him. "You mentioned a funeral earlier." He nodded. "She was a nurse, my partner in the field. We worked far from here." From there, the story flowed, not all at once, not theatrically, but gently, like someone remembering a lifetime in fragments. Elijah had once been a trauma surgeon at a prestigious hospital, titles, lab coat monogrammed, the whole thing. But after a patient died waiting for an insurance approval, something in him cracked. He left everything behind. Traded six-figure paychecks for a second-hand duffel bag. Spent 15 years in war zones, refugee camps, border clinics, places where medicine wasn't glamorous, where the stakes weren't lawsuits but life. He treated mothers giving birth in candlelit tents. He stitched up rebel soldiers and frightened children. He learned 3 dialects, forgot what comfort felt like, and buried more patience than he ever spoke of. "I figured," he said gently, "if I had hands that could heal, I shouldn't waste them chasing status." Victoria's eyes welled without warning. She looked at her own hands, manicured, jeweled, powerful, and suddenly hollow. In her world, a 5-point drop in shares felt like a crisis. In his, a heartbeat was the difference between someone going home or never seeing home again. "You walked away from everything," she said, trying to understand. "No," Elijah said quietly. "I walked towards something." Then, without warning, the plane jolted slightly again, light turbulence this time. But Victoria didn't flinch. She was still staring at his hands, the same ones that had saved a life just moments ago. Scarred, calloused, purposeful. She realized something then. The most powerful hands she'd ever seen didn't hold a pen or command a room. They held no power and still gave everything. And in that moment, Victoria Steele, the woman who once measured worth by titles and company stocks, realized she had just sat beside a man whose currency was entirely different. Lives healed and souls remembered. The cabin seemed to exhale. Passengers began to speak again, softly, uncertainly, as if afraid the quiet might still be needed for someone's survival. The old man now lay stretched across a row, breathing with measured rhythm, an oxygen mask gently fogging with every new breath he had nearly lost. A paramedic team would be waiting upon landing. Everyone knew that. But in that moment, it felt like the crisis had left behind something more than just a survivor. It had left behind a presence. Victoria caught herself staring again, not in judgment this time, but in something closer to reverence. This man, Elijah, had returned to his seat like what he'd just done was normal. Ordinary. No announcement. No inflation of ego. No expectation of reward. Just a sip of water. And silence. From several rows behind, a flight attendant finally spoke. "I didn't get your name, sir." "Elijah Rhodes," he replied. There was a quiet pause, then tentative clapping, one person, then another. Soon the entire cabin was applauding softly, not the boisterous, hollow kind you sometimes hear upon landing, but something reverent, hushed, real. He didn't stand, he didn't bow. He just gave a single, modest nod. And then something unexpected. A child, maybe 7 or 8, slowly approached from a row across the aisle. A small boy with oversized glasses and jelly on his sleeve. In his hands, a faded plastic superhero toy. "I want you to have this," the boy said shyly. Elijah looked down, taken aback. "I saw what you did," the boy whispered. "You're better than Superman." Elijah's voice cracked slightly as he took it. "You just made my day, little man." Victoria watched as he held the tiny figurine in his hand, stared at it a moment, and smiled. It was the purest expression of emotion she'd seen in years, gratitude not for recognition, but for being truly seen. And for the first time in a long time, Victoria felt small, but in a good way. Like something was bigger than her. She turned to him, her voice quieter now. "That man, the one you saved, he has a chance to see his family again, because of you." Elijah shook his head gently. "Because the flight wasn't too late." Victoria blinked, puzzled by the comment. Elijah just looked out the window again. The best moments in life don't always come on schedule. She stared at him longer now, not because she didn't understand, but because for the first time, some part of her did. And that was the moment she knew. She couldn't just walk away from this story and return to life as usual. Airports are always loud, wheels rolling, announcements echoing, people moving like they're already late for something. but in a quiet corner near baggage claim 4, time slowed. Victoria and Elijah sat side by side on a plastic bench, away from the crowd. The crisis was over, but the conversation between them had just begun. "You saved a man's life up there," she said softly. "Not every day you see that on a business trip." He smiled gently. It was supposed to be a funeral trip. Life had other plans. She looked at him closely now. There was no false modesty, no marketing spin, just truth. And it made her uncomfortable in the best way. "You could have stayed in private practice," she said. "Lived comfortably, you were good enough clearly." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I tried that for a while, big salary, nice apartment, and a constant feeling that I was wasting something." "Wasting what?" He turned to her, eyes steady. "A life, not mine, theirs, the ones who never made it into hospitals because they were too far, too poor, too invisible." Victoria swallowed hard. "I had all the right degrees," Elijah continued, "but nothing made sense until I was face to face with a 10-year-old in South Sudan asking me if his sister would live. The sister we just lost." His voice didn't crack. He'd made peace with the memory, but it still lived in him. Victoria stared ahead, thinking of her Monday morning, merger calls, board meetings, press interviews. No grief, just growth charts. And yet, for the first time, she wondered if she was actually doing anything meaningful at all. "I thought I was helping people," she admitted. "Creating jobs, building futures, that was the narrative, but now, I don't know, maybe I got caught up in the chase." "Doesn't mean it's too late to reroute," Elijah said gently. "You're not the first person to build up something and realize it wasn't what you meant to build." Silence passed. Then she laughed, not with joy, but disbelief. "Can I tell you something insane?" she asked. "Please." "I've spent my entire career sitting next to powerful people on flights. Politicians, executives, celebrities, not one of them ever changed me." She looked at him. "Until now." Elijah looked away, touched but a little shy under the weight of it. "I'm just a guy with an old backpack and a few hard lessons." She smiled at him sincerely. "Maybe that's exactly what I needed. Two people, two roads, one conversation that neither of them would ever forget." And as the baggage belt rolled behind them, most passengers rushed off to continue their lives. Victoria and Elijah, they sat still. Just two strangers who, for a few stolen hours, understood exactly what it meant to matter. The next morning, the New York skyline looked the same. The suits in the boardroom sounded the same. The numbers on the screen were better than ever. Yet somehow Victoria still felt different. She sat in the glass and marble fortress of her office, high above the city, and stared at a document she would have normally signed in seconds. A multi-million-dollar proposal to acquire a chain of outpatient clinics and rebrand them under her corporation. All signs pointed to yes. Maximum ROI. Great PR. Minimal risk. But now she hesitated. The words accessible healthcare were all over the packet. So were terms like streamlining, optimization, vertical integration. But nowhere in the 47 pages was the word human. Her eyes drifted to the corner of her desk, where a small plastic superhero toy now sat, the very one the boy had handed Elijah on the flight. She didn't know why she kept it. Maybe because it reminded her that real impact isn't polished or pitch-decked. It just shows up when someone needs it. She stood, walked over to the window and looked out. A line of taxis, a hospital a few blocks away. A woman carrying a child outside its emergency wing. She watched them disappear into the crowd. That image, the boy, the toy, Elijah, kept repeating in her mind like a loop she couldn't escape. For the first time in years, Victoria didn't feel proud of her power. She felt responsible for it. She returned to her desk with intention, pulled up an old contact file, typed a name slowly. Elijah Rhodes. Then she wrote the message. I need your mind and your heart. I think you may have both. She stared at the screen a moment longer before hitting send. Then leaned back in her chair, exhaling for what felt like the first time in years. The flight had ended, but something had just taken off. Not a jet, not a deal. Something far rarer in her world. An awakening. Elijah didn't check his email often. Most days he was off the grid, usually in places where cell towers didn't reach and time wasn't kept by clocks, but by needs. But a few days after the flight, in a quiet library corner in upstate New York, he refreshed his inbox, and there it was. Subject line: about what you said, can we build something real? The message came from Victoria Steele. Simple, direct, personal. She wanted to meet not over coffee or cocktails, but in her foundation's back office, where the real work should be happening. A week later. No press, no boardroom shine. Just a long table covered in papers, grants, cost breakdowns, and a vision scribbled in red marker. My company has reach, Victoria said, standing before a whiteboard. Yours had impact. What if we built a bridge instead of a tower? Her hands trembled as she spoke, not from nerves, but from conviction. Elijah listened with quiet intensity. She laid out a plan, a mobile medical unit program, vans converted into traveling clinics, reaching underserved communities across the U.S. and eventually beyond. No waiting rooms, no insurance loopholes, just access. I want to call it, she hesitated, then turned to him, the Rhodes Initiative. Elijah froze. After me, he asked softly. You gave people their first chance at healing, she said. Now let me give you a second chance at scale. She paused, you're the mission, I'm just the mechanism. For the first time in their short connection, Elijah was speechless. He looked down, brushed his hand across his jacket, still worn, still faded, like he never belonged in places where programs had names. You don't need to do this, he said. She stepped forward. I do. He was quiet, then looked up, eyes wet, voice low. Then let's do it right. And just like that, two people who had sat side by side on a plane, worlds apart, shook hands over something not built to impress, but to serve. The CEO and the medic, power and purpose, finally aligned. 3 years passed. Not the manic kind of passing Victoria was once used to: quarterly reports, fiscal deadlines, annual goals. This time was different. It passed like seasons, slow, alive, meaningful. Somewhere in New Mexico, a dust-covered medical van came to a stop under a waxy orange sunset. The words stenciled onto the side in soft blue read. The Rhodes Initiative, wherever healing needs to go. Inside, the bright hum of sterile equipment played beneath the murmurs of conversation. Children sat with nurses. A young man stitched a wound on an elderly woman's palm. A baby cried. A generator thumped softly in the distance. And at a small folding desk near the back, a photo of a younger Elijah Rhodes smiled back from a laminated placard. Beside it sat Dr. Louis Mejia, 28 years old, former foster child, one of the hundreds whose lives had been touched by that very van years earlier when it rolled through his forgotten desert town and saved his mother's life. Now he wore the coat. Now he held the stethoscope. Now he was the one showing up. And every morning before his first patient, he looked at that photo of Elijah and whispered, "Still watching, Doc." Back in New York, Victoria stood in the lobby of the Rhodes Initiative's newly opened global headquarters. A wide, sunlit space filled with murals, mission statements, and photos of mobile clinics across the world. A young intern approached her. "Ms. Steele." She gently corrected him again. Victoria, just Victoria. Her suits weren't as sharp now. Her posture was a little looser. Her phone, less of a weapon, more of a tool. She still ran companies, still held influence. But her center of gravity had shifted. The data spoke volumes. Rhodes medical units had now served over 1.4 million patients across 6 countries. Provided free emergency care in post-disaster zones. Partnered with communities, not just governments. But it wasn't the numbers that kept Victoria up at night anymore. It was the letters. She received hundreds a month. Handwritten, emailed, texted. Stories of lost hope restored on dusty roads, of children who no longer feared fever, of grandmothers who were still alive because help, for once, actually came. And every time she read one, she thought of his hands. Rough, scarred, steady. Elijah never wanted credit, never took media interviews, never let her rename the program after both of them. He often said, "I was just a thread, you were the needle." But Victoria always knew better. He wasn't a thread. He was the fabric. Today was different, though. Because today, Elijah was retiring. Not quietly, not with speeches or medals, but with old friends, strong coffee, and the soft creak of a rocking chair on a wooden porch somewhere in northern Vermont. Victoria arrived just as the sun edged over the pines. "Elijah," she called, stepping out of the car. He rose a little slower now, but no less dignified. After all, humility never weathered. "You came," he said with a smile, pulling her into a soft, steady hug. "I wouldn't miss this," she replied, placing a hand on his shoulder. They sat together on that porch as the trees rustled, a breeze brushing across the top of the Rhodes Initiative baseball cap he always wore. "You ever think about that flight?" she asked after a long silence. "All the time," he said. She looked out past the tree line. "Still amazes me how much life can hinge on being delayed." Elijah chuckled. "Yeah, funny how the universe reroutes us when we're in a hurry to be someone." She nodded slowly. "I was a machine before that flight, Elijah, a very successful one, but I wasn't living, not fully." He looked at her and smiled. "Now you are." They sat in silence for a long while, watching a hawk circle above the treetops. "I talked to Dr. Meggia last week," she said. "The one whose mom you helped save when that first van stopped in St. Fe." "Yeah," Elijah asked. "He's training the next cohort. We've got 25 new mobile doctors starting this fall." Elijah leaned back in his chair and let out a quiet breath, eyes glistening. "Good, the world needs M." There was a long pause, followed by the low hum of cicadas coming alive for the evening. That's when Victoria reached into her bag and pulled out a small box. "What's this?" he asked. "Something I've been saving." He unwrapped it carefully. Inside, gently set in velvet, was a weathered toy, the exact same plastic superhero the child had once given him on the plane all those years ago. But now it sat on a hand-carved base, with an inscription etched in sterling silver. "To the man who showed us what saving the world really looks like." Elijah smiled down at it, silent for a moment. "I forgot I gave this to you," he said. "I didn't," Victoria replied. "You saved someone's father, you saved my direction." And as sunlight spilled across the porch, stretching over mountains and memory, Elijah held the small figure gently in his hands, just like he once held lives. The hands of a man who gave everything and asked for nothing, and in return, received what few people ever do. Legacy without ego. Impact without spotlight. Love without condition. Victoria reached over, resting her hand on his. "I think you saved more lives than you'll ever know." Elijah nodded, eyes misty. "And I think you helped me save more than I ever could alone." They looked out together, quiet again. No boardrooms. No hotels. No conferences. Just birdsong, memory, and the quiet knowledge that something they built together would keep moving, healing, rising even after they were gone. And far off in the distance, on a hot road under a big sky, another Rhodes van pulled into a new town. Ready, steady, waiting to save a life. All because a flight once got delayed, and a CEO sat down next to a stranger who saw the world a little differently. There are moments in life that don't feel like moments at all. They feel like turning points disguised as inconveniences. To most passengers aboard Flight 271, it was a delay, an annoyance. But to one woman, Victoria Steele, CEO, lifelong overachiever, titan of industry, it became the moment everything changed. Not because of turbulence, not because of failure, but because of who she was seated next to when the plane unexpectedly grounded her routine. Not a billionaire, not a board member, not someone who could boost her career or broaden her portfolio. No, just a man. A quiet, humble man named Elijah Rhodes, whose presence carried no LinkedIn profile, no accolades, no agenda. Just one thing: purpose. Victoria had spent much of her life chasing what everyone told her mattered: market caps, private terminals, speaking slots at innovation summits. In that world, success looks like distance, from struggle, from discomfort, from the people who can't. Yet on that unexpected flight, she learned something that no degree or award had ever taught her. Greatness doesn't always come from standing above. Sometimes it comes from kneeling beside. The world doesn't stop for transformation. That flight landed, people applauded, airport doors opened to waiting lives. Nothing on the outside had immediately changed, but for Victoria, something had cracked open within. A part of her that had hardened from years of pressure and polish slowly began to soften. And if you asked her today, after all the clinics and milestone metrics, she wouldn't say her biggest accomplishment was building a new healthcare initiative. She'd say it was learning how to listen. Because Elijah didn't impress her with power. He moved her with compassion. He didn't talk about legacy. He simply lived one. And maybe that's the point this story has been trying to tell us, not just about two strangers on a plane, but about us all. We live in a loud world that tells us to measure our worth in likes, promotions, upgrades, and square footage. We're taught to admire those who rise fastest, the CEOs, the tech founders, the disruptors, the ones on the cover. But maybe we've been looking at the wrong seats. Maybe the people who show us the most about who we could become are seated quietly in economy, watching the world, carrying burdens deeper than their smiles reveal. No PR team, no speaker fees, just presence. Let's go back to the child on the flight, the one who offered Elijah a superhero toy. That moment wasn't trivial. It was sacred. Because even in his young heart, that boy knew Elijah had done something that most true heroes do. He showed up, without being asked, without needing credit, without thinking of the cost. That child didn't need corporate language or strategy decks. He felt the impact. And in return, Elijah accepted the toy not with pride, but with gratitude. Because somewhere deep inside, even he knew, the world doesn't need more powerful people trying to look humble. It needs humble people finally being seen as powerful. Victoria learned that. And she didn't just carry the memory, she carried it forward. 1.4 million patients, 6 countries reached, thousands of doctors trained. But more than that, she carried his essence into every room she entered next. Before Elijah, she used to walk into meetings wondering how to own the table. Now she walks in asking, who isn't at this table and who needs to be? That's the difference between managing power and awakening humanity. That plane ride wasn't just a story of a doctor saving a life. It was about one simple, extraordinary ripple whispering across another, until both became something bigger than either could have achieved alone. Elijah had healing. Victoria had reach. But together they gave the world two things most rare: access and dignity. Ask yourself, when was the last time you thought about what your presence meant to someone else? What seat you're in, and what kind of story you're writing with it? Maybe today you're feeling overlooked, or invisible, or unimportant. But here's the quiet truth. Visibility doesn't determine value. The story of Elijah reminds us that even when no one is watching, how we show up and what we carry in our heart can still change the course of someone else's life profoundly. And that's the kind of wealth you can't buy, only become. Victoria's journey wasn't about saving the world. It was about remembering why she ever wanted to have influence in the first place. And for those of us listening now, those of us caught up in endless tasks and to-do lists, and social metrics and valuations, maybe the question is, am I successful? Maybe the real question is, have I sat beside someone like Elijah and let it change me? Because sometimes the miracle isn't the saved life. Sometimes it's the interrupted one. The one that gets paused at 30,000 feet, just long enough for us to meet someone who reflects everything we've been missing. A stranger with tired eyes and calloused hands. A man who spent a lifetime giving away what most people hoard. And a child with jelly on his sleeve who helps us all remember. Superheroes aren't born. They're chosen again and again in small, quiet moments. So the next time your flight is delayed, the next time your plans fall through, the next time you find yourself sitting beside someone you would have ignored, ask yourself, what if this interruption is divine? What if this is the seat where something greater begins? What if I'm not waiting on a miracle, but already sitting next to one? True value isn't earned by how high we fly, but by how deeply we care while we're in the air. So honor the quiet ones, the ones who don't boast but build, the ones who don't sell a story, but live one quietly, humbly, bravely. Because sometimes, the most important seat on a plane isn't in first class. It's in the middle of a crowded cabin, next to an ordinary man holding extraordinary grace.